every 4 years, I kind of, at this time, sometimes earlier, give an update of what's happening in Washington. Although I'm sure that many of you know that there's a lot of chaos going on, but I thought, well, why don't I give an update? So, if you go and Google, see what's happening in science, well, here's a good example of what's available. Um, and you can see it's not very good. Um, how Trump is dismantling science, foreign nationals propel U.S. science no more. America's anyway. It's not a pretty picture, but I guess there isn't very much of a pretty picture in Washington on any area that you want to talk about. Well, there are some bright spots maybe. So let's talk about it. Okay, what happened in the last 9 months? We start with the federal workforce. A lot of people quit. Some were fired. Budget was slashed, and most frighteningly, experts were pushed out of leadership positions. This was particularly true in the health areas or biomedicine. It really took the biggest slashing that you could imagine. Uh, and it's sort of like, I don't know who you can look to today if somebody wants to know about, asthma or heart attacks or any drugs or whatever. Uh, there's just what I would recommend is just talk to your own doctor and don't listen to the chatter that you get on television or and wherever else you get your news from. Uh, Frighteningly, there's critical research that has been going on for years, projects that have come almost to the end, and they got wiped out. Either people left, were fired, or budgets just were cut midterm. Some of the money is coming back. In fact, I just heard day before yesterday that Harvard got $2 billion of grants that were awarded, that were terminated, but now they're coming back. So there is some relief, but it's late, and I'm not sure it's going to help a lot. And independent advisory committees, again, especially in health areas, but also in STEM, in science, were either just told to vacate or there was no money to pay for them for traveling. And so some people travel on their own nickel, but it was just not very useful overall. And there's a lot of disinformation. I mean, especially in the first 6 months, there was so much this disinformation that you really didn't know what to believe, and you best just kind of stop trying to educate yourself, except maybe go to the library and look up Encyclopedia Britannica uh, to get any information. And again, at the beginning, there were people put in with questionable credentials. I mean, and this is not just science. I mean, the Defense Department, we got a idiot running who thinks that overweight means you can't do your job properly. And as you probably heard, that he ordered everybody uh, third and second and two stars to come to uh, Virginia so he can give a pep talk about how they should dress and how should they behave. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it is what it is. Uh, Now, there is a director of Office of Science and Technology Policy. The guy's name is Michael Kratsios. And when he was confirmed, a lot of people were looking for him to try to provide some guidance to the White House. But he graduated from Princeton, and you know, nothing it's having to do. I'm not sure he even had a basic physics course, but anyway, he he's there, and I don't hear much from him. No policies coming out supporting science, and with his background, it's not surprising that he really doesn't talk much. All the agencies, there are like 8 or 9 agencies that have science budgets. They're all been slashed across the board. Now, you heard a lot about DEI policies, uh, and I misspelled here, police. But the problem is that anything that had anything, it was like a word search through a grant or proposal. And if there was anything that has a few key words that the White House didn't like, the grant got cut. And I can you tell you from some of my friends who are still in academia, they spent a lot of time searching all of their proposals and grants and prospects for you know uh, success by looking for certain words and get rid of them. And this is true even people who have grants dealing with I don't want to say weapons, but from Defense Department on AI, for example, you still have to look for certain words and delete them. Otherwise, your grant might be terminated. I mean, the terminations were not done by a human. They were done by, I guess, computers. Anything that had any word in there, the grant immediately got terminated or put on hold. And it's Harvard. You heard about Harvard because it's kind of close by, and but other Ivy League schools got really hit hard. The foreign students are in limbo. Many, who have gone away for the summer are concerned because they can't come back due to immigration policies. And those who are here are trying to be very quiet, except for a few who are, making sound. And unfortunately, all it takes is one or two students who are in the crosshairs of ICE or the White House, and everybody else gets hit. Now, as I said, I don't see much of a light in the end of the tunnel yet. There are a few flickers, which, I hope that they mean something, but yet to see what's happening, really. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments, you could interrupt me or we could talk about it at the end. Okay.
George, what
So,
is DEI?
mm,
What is DEI?
diversity,
We got it.
what is it? Yeah. Well, anything that has to do comparing people, uh, and it could be or comparing samples, microbes, it gets cut. Let's start with the major funding agency and one that affects all of us. It is the National Institute of Health. Well, the guy on top is RFK Jr., Kennedy. I don't have to say much about it, but the point is he's anti-science. He has a few quirky beliefs about vaccines, but it's actually across the board. We all know about vaccines and how he feels about them, but there are other things that he just, doesn't like or doesn't believe. And I'm not sure who he looks for guidance other than just his own kind of quirky background. Uh, the budget got proposed, and from 48 billion to 27. Now, for this year, fiscal 2026, which started October 1st. Now, probably is going to go higher than 27 billion because even Republican Congress is not going to allow cuts across the board in a way that will just decimate the whole enterprise. But it probably will be substantial reduction once we get a budget for 2026. And as you know, the government shut down, and so it's not right now. It's continuing resolution, but continuing resolution in the past meant the government was funding based on last year, but now even that funding has been sharply reduced. So it doesn't really mean anything. We have to wait until the end of the shutdown and see what happens. Now, like for example, the Supreme Court allowed $2 billion in research funding to be reinstated. But 2 billion out of 27 or 48 is just very small amount, so it's not going to make much difference. Now the NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya Raya, sorry for the mispronunciation. If you look at him, he's got good credentials, MD, PhD. But then you look and see what he's for and against. For example, he was against the lockdowns, and that I can sort of understand. But he was also against wearing masks. He believed in the herd immunity theory that if everybody got sick, eventually the virus would disappear. Well, we know that didn't work in some cases, but it just shows you that he's still got some really issues. Now, many projects are on hold. More importantly, hiring prospects are very dim for young scientists. And especially things were hard before, but now if you're in bioscience or any other area like that, unless you're a practicing physician, the chances of getting a job are tough in the U.S. And so many are leaving for overseas because other countries are kind of uh, looking for opportunities to take in young people from the U.S. Uh, then, I was looking at some of the Yale University, and like 4 professors left, took a leave of absence, and went to Canada. And they basically said, "Look, we just can't continue doing this. in the U.S. and they left for Canada. Whether they'll come back, we don't know, but it's a big hole in some departments, especially Europeans who came here for jobs, scientists or Chinese, are going back. And Europe has open door policies to attract the best, and we are losing a lot of faculty and students who potentially would be the next generation of scientists in the U.S. Uh, and you look down at grant review process. If I, put in a grant proposal to NSF or NIH or any other agency, there's a review process that's been going on, and it's not perfect, but the whole process is in jeopardy because even though it can be selected, uh, it has to be approved. In NIH case, it has to go up to RFK Jr. and he has to approve it, and then some go to the White House for final approval. So even if you get 5 stars on your proposal, if the White House doesn't like something in there, it says no. And so not the best things are getting funded, even at a reduced rate. And there's no peer review process that's working because of the oversight that the White House or the director, in a case of RFK, uh, has. So now NSF, I'm quite familiar because I worked for them many years, and I have friends still who are there. Uh, it's in even worse disarray than NIH in some ways. Uh, the budget got slashed, and the director said, "Hey, I can't live with this." This is when Musk was firing people right and left, and he quit in April. So right now, NSF doesn't have anybody at the helm, and that there was an acting director, but he's not very effective. Budget reduction has been in place, and there was a restructuring. There is a NSF works on discipline. There's a physics, chemistry, um, computer science, engineering director. All of those directorates have been reshuffled and restructured. And the White House basically said, look, we're going to focus on 2 areas, AI and quantum computing. I think the White House kind of uses those buzzwords. So anything that has AI or quantum computing, they kind of put it on top of the heap. Everything else goes at the bottom. And the, already grants have been terminated. Some, especially in social sciences, the departments have been dissipated. There are 1,400 grants that were terminated in the first few months of the year. Uh, and more, many no new starts because, they really don't know how to do go forward. So any grant proposal that you submitted to NSF is on hold. And when will be unfrozen, not clear. And again, funding priorities, and this goes across all agencies. If it's AI or quantum computing, no matter the quality of the proposal, it gets high rankings. Now so NIH, NSF, and the Office of Science at DOE are probably the major funding agencies for science.
George?
Yes.
Did you skip over the NSF?
No, I just did that.
I'm sorry, that was me. I'll wake up sometime soon.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, I went NIH, NSF, and now Office of Science, DOE. Most people don't realize, but DOE Office of Science is a major supporter of STEM areas. I mean, they have a huge budget for example, quantum computing, which is good, but also for physics, high energy physics, fusion, uh, and anything related to energy. Um, it's funded by DOE Office of Science. Now, the head of the Office of Science is an undersecretary of science, and I have to say, based on credentials, the guy got just named, and he's Tario Gill. It's a PhD, MIT, and more importantly, he was a former director of IBM Research. So, he clearly is going to be good for computing and quantum computing and other areas dealing with AI and quantum computing, which I think is why they chose him. But at least, there's a credible head right now. They still have a potential budget cuts, but most of those budget cuts deal with energy, not fossil energy, but renewable energy. So things like that got cut. They worked with 6 advisory committees. Now, the advisory committees are outside people who advise the department on priorities. So, for example, in fusion, there was like 6 or 8 people that advise on fusion. The same thing with nuclear power, uh, chemistry, and so forth. Well, before Dario came on, they consolidated those advisory committees into one. Now, in some ways, I can see the rationale, but I don't see when you get a physicist, a chemist, and a mathematician in the same room to talk about priorities in in their fields, and they have it just doesn't work. I mean, uh, your committee has to be focused to make a decision. Otherwise, you're never going to get anything on there. So I think the committee structure is bad, in my opinion, and hopefully Dario can bring some sense to it. Some projects got redirected, as I said, especially renewable energy project that Trump didn't like. But talking to at least one friend of mine who has a grant from the DOE in science, he said, there's some hope for stability. For first few months, it was chaotic because they didn't know what's coming and didn't want to do anything, but they feel now that maybe things are going to improve. We'll see. Now, NASA, you probably know what has happened at the top. Um, there, Musk had a guy that he liked to have head of NASA, who was very much interested in NASA, especially manned projects. But then when Musk left, The guy, I don't even remember his name, got pulled, and currently they have no head. Although the Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, is now responsible for NASA, which means he's not really not paying much attention, and they're kind of drifting. Uh, there's a big reduction in force, especially government people who work for government, like at Texas or Alabama and whatever, the laboratories, and even JPL, which is associated with Caltech, had like 500 people leaving, being asked to leave, as I say. They had an office of science, chief scientist, and this was important because he spoke for the science projects. So that you have a mission, like going to Mars or whatever, uh, there's associated things that you can do on the science part, and the office of the chief scientist was responsible for doing that. Well, with the office eliminated, it's not clear how projects are going to have science associated with them. The good news is that planetary projects like the Mars rovers are continuing. Voyager. Uh, so that's good because at least those are not being terminated. Um, but no new projects are starting, and everybody's waiting for a new administrator or somebody to come in and provide some direction, which is really not a good situation. So I think updates from NASA are probably not going to happen for a while. Now, the next one, the Department of Commerce has NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. It's a smaller agency, but important. They do a lot of engineering work, and they have nominated a dean of engineering. His name is Arvind Raban, who has good credentials, and there's hope that they will do well. They're heavily in AI and not so much in quantum computing. They're more in supercomputers, but their budget hasn't really been that affected as of right now. Okay, confirmation process. Good and the bad, I guess. September 18th, as you know, there was the Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate were at odds about nominating and approving nominees. And this affected science agencies as much as judges and other posts, ambassadors, and so forth. Finally, the Republicans succeeded in what was called the nuclear option, where their majority agreed that we don't need to go individually to approve nominees. And so a whole batch of people got approved. 50 approved on September 18th. Well, among those were some of the uh, people that we talked about. There, are fairly okay. And so some of the heads are coming in. Then October 3, another new batch of nominees got confirmed, and some S&T people, and these are deputy directors or assistant directors, people in various organizations that have a top person, second and third, they need Senate confirmation. Unfortunately, there is no one from NSF and no one from NASA that got approved. So we're still waiting for those agencies to have nominees and approval. Okay, well, now we're talking about the federal government. Unfortunately, universities had their own set of problems and issues. Uh, First one was, of course, funding and overall reduction of 22%. And basic research got hit really hard. So it's 22 overall, but 34 in basic research. And across the board, this is basic research in chemistry, physics, and math, for example. Just indiscriminately got cut. Uh, and the partnerships that existed between U.S. universities and the federal government is really, to me, having worked in the government and knowing how well things were after World War II, when universities, faculties provided advice to the government, that has really been hurt badly. And it's sort of across the board. There are a few people who are still kind of staying there, but their voices are being lost among um, policy hawks, if you will, of the right. And you can have somebody, uh, women. I mean, not women, well, Laura Hawker or whatever her name is, who's a journalist, right wing. Uh, she got uh, people at the senior level fired for something that they did 20 years ago. I mean, the national science, not science, but the national uh, the, computer people, NSA, National Security Agency, lost their top admiral. Uh, He's a military guy. He was pretty good. And he got fired because she put it in the word of the White House that he said some things that were anti-Trump policies. And, Department of Defense lost some of the top people because Pete, the Secretary of War, didn't like them or was suspecting that they were not loyal to him. So, you know, I worry that if we get into a war, it's going to take a while before things get straightened out, and uh, we get somebody there that who knows what they're doing and willing to say this works, this doesn't work. And the other thing that's affecting universities in a major, well, two things affecting me, foreign students, which make up about graduate students, make about 27% of graduate students in the U.S. has been severely cut back because of limitations, visa issues, and other things. And so, quite frankly, the U.S. has benefited by having the best universities and attracting the best of the best. So, if you have 2 billion people in China or, 1 billion in India, the best of the best try to come to the U.S. to, to study, and many of them stay and take on very senior positions. I mean, even in the Trump administration, you see the names that are Indian or Chinese origin. But we're no longer doing that. Uh, the best of the best no longer want to come here. They're afraid. Um, you get accepted, you get a visa, and then you enter the airport on U.S. soil, and you're turned back. And this fear, uncertainty, is creating a situation that if you're really good, you're not going to want to come here. Why bother? You have an offer from Europe or China or Australia, Canada. You just avoid coming to the U.S. And the other thing that's hurting universities is overhead. Now, what is overhead? A lot of researchers kind of resent overhead, but the overhead provides money for university to have laboratories, big laboratories, clinical laboratories. Uh, but if your overhead is capped at 15%, and to give you an example, if I try to get a project done with Los Alamos, now this is, weapons laboratory, the overhead is 600%. What they're saying is, we will, do a project, but you have to support the infrastructure that is making up the laboratory. 15%, you barely have, people, accountants who kind of count how money is spent. You have no oversight, no possibility of building new laboratories, buying new large equipment like supercomputer or what have you. And right now, with 15% cap, and if it continues for the next 3 years, it's going to be, a disaster, because that means all equipment is going to be that old. And equipment, you have to upgrade. Things change. So, and again, people who don't know make decisions and they don't care. Many of you remember what Mao Zedong in China did during the I forget what they call it, the red. Uh, I forget, but anyway, it was a period where Mao had all of the faculty, technical people, work on farms to show that they're equal. Well, if you talk to most Chinese today, they have a gap of a generation lost due to that chaos that happened in China. I'm afraid that the way we're going, we're going to have a gap in the U.S. and it's going to set us back 3 or 4 years before we could try to catch up. And maybe I'm pessimistic, but I just talking to my friends, most of them are happy that they retired or are soon to be retired, because really nobody wants to take any position of senior management, because they don't see where a chance where they can do something good. Uh, and then a little bit about graduate students. The 27% that are foreign, they pay full tuition. Now, you might say universities are kind of greedy, but that 27% who pay full tuition, it goes across the board. It allows U.S. students to have lower tuition. They have possible work that they can provide. But with this reduction, the visa problems and competition, I I have a grandson who's a senior, and he's having a tough time finding a professor that will take him on for graduate school because of the uncertainty that this professor can get a grant. He has a pending grant, but he's not going to take anybody on until the money is in his hand. And so he's kind of holding off. So my grandson got a job. Uh, and, whether he's going to go back to graduate school, I don't know. But it's just a very small sample of people that we can look at and see how it is being affected. Uh, so I would say that the grant terminations in STEM look better than grants in biochemistry, health, and it's due to top-down decisions. Um, the only way I can really see is if RFK is fired for some reason or other, and somebody else comes in, because I really can't explain what is happening at NIH. So, any questions?
No questions, but George, I have one comment for you about the, the Americans. I never realized how many jerks, and I use that in quotation marks, there were, when we had COVID come in. People didn't believe it. They didn't know what public health meant, although they were ignorant about it. It's amazing. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are in government, and I call them the idiots.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And
Oh, George, I got to ask
some
you a
of
question. Since you've got a PhD and it's your grandson, I don't know what he's going to grad school for, but what happens if Grandpa teaches the grandson?
well,
Yeah.
I can't blame him. He's got a bachelor's in math and computer science,
Mm-hmm.
and he's still thinking about grad school, but he took a internship job um, for 6 months to see how things go. And if he does go back, it'll be next fall, a year from now. But in some ways, it's good to take a break from school. On the other
Yes.
hand, if you take a break and you like the money that you're making, and maybe get engaged or marry or whatever, uh, grad school becomes an interruption.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we support him, but still, he provides a kind of a glimpse of what's happening out there.
Yeah, so the education has to be formal. It can't be, personal like I was getting at.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. But I have a good friend who is a provost, who was a provost at UC Berkeley, and he said it's a disaster out there because people can't make plans, and lack of clarity. People are making other decisions, and they're losing some of the best people that are prospective.
We had a question here in the center.
Yeah, Noah escaped your mention, I think, unless I missed it. But I know that was a big topic in the first Trump administration, where he kind of made a lot of noise about going in and gutting that agency. And then I know there were, of the people that are involved in that brand of research and data analytics, there were threats not only to cut the agency, but basically to eliminate its accumulated stores of data, and basically damage the mission of the agency, the long-term mission of the agency as a policy advisor, because they simply didn't agree with the kind of policy advice that was coming out of the agency.
It's still
Well,
true.
and data. I mean, you hear about the jobs and inflation data being withheld. Well, the same thing is what is being withheld is any effects on climate. Hurricane prediction, which you would think, especially people in Florida, would really care about, but somehow their voices are not heard.
Well, windmills cause cancer, and renewable energy is really terrible for your whole country, as we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we don't need NOAA anymore.
There was an article in the Boston Globe this morning about the, I don't know which agency, the weather people working without pay. And because of that, they were able to warn people about this recent hurricane that touched us, but didn't really hit us. They have to work without pay.
Yeah. Well, even airports staff are being have cut back. Some which has left because they're frustrated, and especially this is true in smaller airports, which are understaffed badly. I mean, the major airports, have still good coverage, but the smaller airports have no coverage. I mean, you heard. I heard this thing in Wichita, Kansas. Airport had no staff, so airplanes had manual and visual landings and takeoffs. I mean, it's incredible. 21st century. You go back to the way things were in darkest days of Africa, which you have to land without any support, not knowing what's going on.
Well, George, what the picture you're painting is, and thank you, by the way, it was really interesting. The picture you're painting is just a snapshot of where we are today. My fear is, where are we going to be 6 months, a year from now? What part of the drain are we circling? And how fast do we get there? Because the things we're talking about here, you can't just push a button and start them back up again once they've been cut. All
Right.
these things take time. And, and maybe somebody in this group will be alive when it happens again, but it's not necessarily guaranteed.
Yeah, I agree. Even if tomorrow things get back, back to quote unquote normal, the impact is going to be felt.
Yeah,
So-
research projects that you have to put on hold.
Yeah.
How do you just sort of pick it back up? It's not like you stopped in the middle of doing a mathematical calculation, and you just go back to where you were, punch the numbers in the computer, if you will.
And that sounds very
Yeah.
dark. And yet I think it's in some ways a very optimistic viewpoint of like, what if we just stop hitting ourselves in the head? How long does it take us to kind of get back on track? But I think the reality is, once you've mixed politics into some of these formerly apolitical decision-making processes and advisory councils and stuff like that,
And
you can't just
left the
take it back
barn.
out. Yeah, you can't just reach in and say, well, let's go back to how we were 2 years ago or something. It's not going to work. Once it's been politicized,
Yeah.
it's going to be forever politicized. And we may have to flush these organizations and start over somehow with new mandates for stuff that we've been able to take for granted for multiple decades. In many cases, these agencies have operated quietly and peacefully without too much political interruption. Once it's injected in there, I think the idea of just taking it back out and going back to how we were is very optimistic.
Well, it'll be easy. We'll just go to China and Europe and rehire the people that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, in some ways, with Europe, rebuilding this structure, maybe I feel it's okay because they're so allies. But in competition with China, you would think that this is one area that we really need to be careful. But we're kind of losing to them. And
You're right.
Yeah,
anyway,
was it in the news?
I'm sorry for being so pessimistic, but I was reluctant to have to give this talk, but I thought, well, after 9 months, maybe it's time to do it. So
Yeah, George, I'm glad you did it.
hopefully a year from now, if I give another talk on the same subject, things will be better.
Well, the thing you're talking about, George, and it's an unfortunate reality of politics today. Generally speaking, in this room and in this area, we live in a bubble that's a little more liberal than a lot of the country. If you gave the same talk in the Midwest or in the central part of the country, where it's more conservative and less liberal, you might find that people are cheering for all these things because all the programs that were being done in terms of liberal priorities are being cut. And I say that not because it's the right thing to do, but it's the state of where we are today in this country. We have people in camps with a huge moat between them, and there's no way for anybody to cooperate between the camps and say, we don't have to cut everything, but let's maybe take a look and see what's going on and maybe, trim a little bit. I don't think there's anybody that would argue that the federal government might have been a little bloated, but not bloated to the point where it's 90% of, 90% the waste or whatever the current number happens to be. It's not 90%, but I'm just exaggerating to make a point.
Well, it's 90% of things are being affected.
Yeah.
That's not an exaggeration, even though the funding hasn't been cut 90%, but the whole process has been affected. Like the review process, it takes years to build up expertise and these committees. Now, some of them probably need reforms, or at least to have some, terminations, and have so many years that you can serve on things. But that's one reform. Another reform is to cut everything out and restructure. Well, it's like if you get rid of 6 committees and create one, the chances of that one committee working immediately are probably 0. So then, say, well, who's going to make the decisions? Well, you don't have decisions. NIH worked on the principle that they have committees to review. So you have a proposal that you send in, it gets reviewed by a committee, and that committee then prioritizes things, top 1, 2, 3, and almost rank. But if you don't have a committee, then who decides what gets funded and what doesn't get funded?